Alabama, 1967. The humid summer air hung heavy over the small town of Cedarville, a place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were meant to stay buried. But beneath the idyllic veneer of picket fences and church steeples, a darkness had festered for decades. The kind of darkness that no one dared speak of until now. It all began with the disappearance of 16-year-old Evelyn Harper. Evelyn was a bright, spirited girl with a laugh that could light up a room and a curiosity that often led her to wander the dusty back roads of Cedarville. Her parents, Mary and Thomas Harper, were pillars of the community, devout churchgoers who believed in honesty, hard work, and neighborly trust. Evelyn's sudden absence shattered that illusion. The town initially chalked it up to a teenage whim, a runaway story whispered in schoolyards and over dinner tables. But as days turned to weeks, whispers became murmurs of fear, then dread. Evelyn had vanished without a trace. Her bicycle, once parked neatly by the side of her home, was gone. So were her books, her favorite scarf, and the small silver locket she always wore around her neck. The last anyone saw her, she was heading toward the edge of town, toward the overgrown woods that locals avoided after dark. The sheriff at the time, Harold Briggs, was a man respected for his calm demeanor and unwavering sense of duty. But even he was baffled. Investigators scoured the woods, questioned neighbors, and interviewed friends, but every lead fizzled into nothing. And yet, there was one thing that gnawed at Briggs, the subtle tension in the community, the way certain people avoided eye contact, and the hushed conversations that ended the moment law enforcement entered the room. As the days stretched into months, Cedarville's sense of security eroded. Parents kept children indoors, and friends avoided streets where Evelyn had been last seen. The church that had once been the heart of the town now echoed with silent prayers and worried glances. And somewhere in the shadows, the person responsible watched, confident that time would erase their crime. In the years that followed, Evelyn's case became one of Alabama's most infamous cold cases. Generations grew up hearing the story. The missing girl whose disappearance had shaken a tight-knit town. People wondered, would justice ever come? Would Evelyn's name be cleared, or would the mystery linger forever, like the oppressive summer heat that refused to lift from Cedarville? And then, decades later, in a twist no one could have foreseen, a breakthrough arrived that would shock the community to its core. But before we get to that, it's important to understand not just Evelyn's life, but the complex web of relationships, secrets, and small-town politics that would shape the investigation, and ultimately, the arrest that would reverberate through Alabama. Evelyn Harper was not just a name in a missing person file. She was a daughter, a friend, a neighbor, and a symbol of lost innocence. And as her story unfolds, you'll see why her case became more than a cold file. It became a mirror reflecting the dark undercurrents of a town that prided itself on appearances. If you're following along, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. You'll want to see every shocking revelation in this decades-long investigation. The morning after Evelyn Harper's disappearance, Cedarville seemed smaller, quieter, almost as if the town itself were holding its breath. Sheriff Harold Briggs and a small team of deputies went door to door, questioning neighbors and friends, hoping someone might have noticed something, anything, that could shed light on the teenage girl's sudden absence. The Harper home was the first stop. Mary Harper was still in her nightgown, clutching a handkerchief that trembled in her fingers. Her eyes, red-rimmed from sleepless nights, followed Briggs around the living room like a hawk. Thomas Harper, usually a man of composed demeanor, paced the floor, muttering under his breath. "Sheriff, she wouldn't just leave," Thomas said, his voice tight with tension. "Not Evelyn. She's never been that kind of child." Briggs nodded solemnly. "I understand, Mr. Harper. That's why we're leaving no stone unturned. We're talking to everyone who might have seen her, anyone who might know something." They started with Evelyn's friends. Teenagers were notoriously unreliable narrators, prone to exaggeration, but Briggs believed even small details could lead somewhere. Evelyn's best friend, Lila Jean Cooper, remembered seeing Evelyn the day before she disappeared. "She seemed distracted," Lila Jean said, twirling a strand of hair nervously. She kept looking over her shoulder, like she was worried about someone. "Worried about who?" Briggs asked. "I don't know," Lila Jean admitted. "She wouldn't say. She just left to go walk near the woods. She said she needed to think. That was the last time I saw her. The description was vague, but it painted a picture. Evelyn had been uneasy. Briggs made a mental note to investigate who might have caused her distress. But there was no concrete suspect yet, and Cedarville's small-town dynamic meant that nearly everyone knew everyone else. Sometimes too well. The woods where Evelyn was last seen became the next focus. Briggs and his deputies combed through overgrown trails, old logging paths, and the riverbanks. They brought in K-9 units to search for scents, but the dogs did not track anything beyond a certain point. There were footprints, yes, boots and sneakers, but many belonged to the local kids who often wandered those trails. Nothing stood out. As the days passed, rumors began to swirl. Some townspeople suggested that Evelyn had been taken by a drifter, someone passing through the area. Others whispered about family disputes, or perhaps a clandestine relationship gone wrong. Cedarville was a town that liked to assign blame, often before facts were known. One clue finally surfaced. A torn piece of fabric caught on a branch near the edge of the woods. Briggs carefully collected it, sending it to the state crime lab in Birmingham for analysis. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was enough to reignite hope. Neighbors recalled seeing a stranger around town in the days leading up to Evelyn's disappearance. He was a man in his 40s, often seen near the gas station, buying cigarettes, lingering just long enough to be noticed but never introduced. Briggs followed every lead, checking license plates, interviewing shopkeepers, and reviewing the guest logs from local businesses. Still, nothing definitive emerged. It was during these early days that Briggs realized Cedarville's tightly knit community was both a help and a hindrance. People were reluctant to speak openly about neighbors, fearful of repercussions or social ostracism. And yet, everyone had seen something, even if they didn't realize its significance. The task was to separate fact from fear, observation from gossip. Meanwhile, Mary Harper refused to leave the house, sleeping in the living room with the lights on. She clutched Evelyn's locket, praying day and night for any news. Thomas Harper, frustrated and anxious, began keeping a detailed journal of every conversation, every sighting, every tip that came their way. It was a record that would later prove invaluable. Among the early leads, one particularly disturbing account came from a local farmer, Jeb Collins. He claimed he had seen a suspicious vehicle parked near the woods around the time Evelyn disappeared. A black sedan, shiny but old, with tinted windows. Collins wasn't sure why it caught his attention, only that it seemed out of place in a town where most people drove pickup trucks or old station wagons. Briggs noted the description carefully, cross-referencing it with vehicle registrations in the county. Despite the growing list of potential leads, the investigation had no solid direction. The weeks crawled by, each day heavier than the last, and Cedarville's sense of security continued to crumble. Children were kept indoors, neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, and church pews were filled not with joy, but with quiet, anxious prayers. Even as hope dimmed, Briggs refused to give up. He organized a community meeting at the local school gymnasium, asking anyone who had information come forward. Attendance was high, but participation was cautious. Some whispered rumors about Evelyn's personal life, suggesting she had been secretive or rebellious, but none provided actionable evidence. The sheriff knew he needed a breakthrough, and he had a hunch that the key lay in the quiet corners of the town, in those hushed conversations people thought he wasn't listening to. What he didn't realize was that someone in Cedarville knew more than they were letting on, and that person was watching every move he made. As the investigation stretched into its third month, Cedarville's quiet streets grew tense. The absence of Evelyn Harper was no longer a fleeting concern. It had become a defining feature of the town. Parents walked their children to school, locking doors behind them, while teenagers whispered in corners, afraid to share even the smallest recollections. Fear had seeped into the fabric of daily life. Sheriff Briggs, meanwhile, worked tirelessly. He expanded the search radius, canvassing the surrounding counties and interviewing every stranger reported to have been in Cedarville in the preceding weeks. The black sedan reported by Jeb Collins became a focal point, but tracking it proved nearly impossible. Its owner had recently moved, leaving no forwarding address, and the vehicle registration led to a man with no criminal record and a seemingly airtight alibi. Briggs knew he had to dig deeper. He began looking at patterns, Evelyn's routines, the people she interacted with, even the places she liked to visit. He examined her school records, talking to teachers, classmates, and school staff. They describe her as bright and inquisitive, sometimes stubborn, but polite and well-liked. She was curious, yes, and her inquisitiveness may have led her to wander the woods. But curiosity alone didn't explain her disappearance. One lead that initially seemed promising came from an unlikely source. The town gossip, Mrs. Clara Whitmore, a widow who spent her mornings sitting on her porch, observing the comings and goings of her neighbors. She claimed she had seen Evelyn speaking with a man in his 40s, someone she described as too smooth, too polite, and too eager to appear harmless. Briggs listened carefully. The description was vague, but it suggested that Evelyn had indeed interacted with someone outside her circle, a stranger whose motives remained unclear. However, this lead soon proved frustrating. The town's records offered little, and those who knew the man reportedly in question were tight-lipped, unwilling to implicate someone without proof. Briggs realized he was facing a problem familiar to investigators in small towns. Loyalty to one's own often outweighed concern for justice. Every conversation seemed to circle back to fear, silence, or misdirection. Meanwhile, the Harper family struggled under the weight of uncertainty. Mary Harper's health began to decline, her grief manifesting as physical weakness and constant fatigue. Thomas Harper, though outwardly stoic, experienced moments of despair that threatened to overwhelm him. Friends and relatives tried to offer comfort, but there was little anyone could do when the truth was hidden somewhere beyond reach. In a bid to pressure witnesses into speaking, Briggs enlisted the help of a state detective, Ruth Langley, known for her tenacity and ability to navigate delicate social dynamics. Langley's approach differed from Briggs. While he relied on procedure and formal questioning, she had a knack for reading people, noticing subtle inconsistencies in their stories, and gently probing until they revealed what they were concealing. Together, they began re-interviewing townspeople, focusing on minor details often overlooked in the chaos of initial questioning. During one particularly long day of interviews, Langley uncovered a curious pattern. Multiple individuals mentioned a local man, Henry Caldwell, a handyman and part-time construction worker who had been seen near the woods at odd hours. Caldwell was in his 40s, married with no children, and known to be reclusive. His demeanor was polite but distant. He rarely engaged in town events and often avoided eye contact. On the surface, he was harmless, a background figure in the life of Cedarville. But his proximity to the woods and his vague presence around Evelyn's last known locations piqued Langley's interest. Briggs hesitated. Caldwell had no criminal record. He was respected by some, tolerated by others, and largely invisible in the social sphere. Yet, in cases like this, absence of record did not equate to innocence. Langley persuaded Briggs to focus discreetly on Caldwell, gathering background information, speaking to former neighbors, and reviewing employment history. While Briggs and Langley worked, the community's misdirection complicated matters further. Small-town gossip had a life of its own, weaving stories that obscured facts. Rumors circulated that Evelyn had eloped with a secret boyfriend. Others claimed she had been kidnapped by outsiders passing through the county. Some, fueled by decades of racial and social tension, pointed fingers at families outside the Harper circle. Every theory, plausible or not, demanded investigation, stretching the already limited resources of law enforcement. A breakthrough came unexpectedly. A local mail carrier, who had delivered to the edge of the woods, remembered seeing Evelyn on the day she disappeared. But not alone. She had been with a man who matched the description of Caldwell. The carrier's account was vague at first, almost dismissible, but under gentle questioning, more details emerged. The man had seemed unusually insistent, guiding Evelyn toward the overgrown path that led into the woods. The carrier had not interfered at the time, assuming it was a harmless interaction between neighbors. This revelation provided the first tangible connection between Evelyn and a potential suspect. Briggs and Langley now had a direction, albeit a delicate one, given Caldwell's standing in the community. A decision had to be made: confront him directly or continue gathering evidence to ensure a watertight case. They opted for patience, fearing that a hasty confrontation could drive him underground or destroy fragile leads. Investigators began piecing together Caldwell's movements around the time of Evelyn's disappearance. Employment records, grocery receipts, and local anecdotes painted a picture of a man who was meticulous, often predictable, yet capable of sudden, unexplained excursions. Nothing concrete tied him to a crime scene yet. As the investigation deepened, the Harper family's anguish persisted. Mary Harper spent hours alone in her room, clutching Evelyn's belongings, while Thomas Harper attempted to maintain normalcy, tending to farm and interacting with neighbors. Their daily lives were haunted by the absence of closure. Cedarville, once a community of shared smiles and neighborly greetings, had transformed into a town shadowed by suspicion, fear, and the constant reminder of crime unpunished. Through it all, Briggs and Langley knew one truth. Time favored the guilty in cold cases. Decades could pass, but memories fade, witnesses die, and leads disappear. They needed to act carefully, strategically, and relentlessly, balancing the urgency of justice with the complexity of human behavior in a tight-knit town. It was a slow, painstaking process, with misdirection at every turn, dead ends that frustrated investigators, and a community reluctant to speak the truth. But each new interview, each piece of minutiae, brought them closer to the moment when decades of silence would finally be broken. By the end of the second section of Part 2, the investigation had evolved from initial confusion and scattered leads to a targeted focus on a potential suspect. The stage was set for deeper exploration of evidence, uncovering hidden truths and confronting the dark reality that had been quietly lurking in Cedarville for decades. The community was unaware that the story they thought was buried in the past was about to resurface in a way that would shock everyone and redefine what they believed about their neighbors, their town, and the very nature of trust. Part 3, Section 1, Breakthrough Evidence. By the spring of 1968, nearly a year had passed since Evelyn Harper vanished. Cedarville had learned to live with the uncertainty, though no one truly adapted. Every parent, every neighbor, carried a quiet unease, and every small event, an unlocked door, a forgotten bicycle, a late return home, was scrutinized through a lens of fear. Sheriff Briggs and Detective Langley, however, refused to accept defeat. The lead on Henry Caldwell, previously a shadow in the investigation, began to solidify. Small anomalies in his story started to emerge. He claimed that on the day Evelyn disappeared, he had been fixing a neighbor's fence, a mundane task, yet details from the neighbor's account were inconsistent. Time frames didn't match, and minor contradictions began to accumulate. Langley sensed something crucial was hidden behind Caldwell's calm, polite exterior. The first tangible breakthrough came from a tip by a retired school janitor, Mr. Bill Harrow. He had been clearing out old school storage when he stumbled upon an envelope containing letters and a small notebook with cryptic entries. At first glance, it seemed inconsequential, mundane adolescent musings, but closer inspection revealed something unsettling. Among the scribbles were references to Evelyn, including her last known routines, her favorite spots in town, and vague mentions of meeting someone by the woods. Briggs and Langley carefully cataloged the items and cross-referenced them with previously collected evidence. The notebook had faint smudges of dirt along the edges, consistent with exposure to outdoor environments. Forensic examination revealed traces of plant matter and soil samples matching areas near the woods where Evelyn had been last seen. This was the first time a physical connection linked a person in the town to the site of her disappearance. The investigators pressed forward, questioning anyone who had access to the notebook and letters. The handwriting, though anonymous, bore striking similarities to Caldwell's known penmanship from his employment records and personal notes. Langley pushed for more, seeking corroboration that could tie him definitively to Evelyn's disappearance. Meanwhile, Caldwell continued his routine, largely oblivious to the scrutiny. To the casual observer, he was a quiet, unassuming man, blending into the background of Cedarville life. But under the microscope of a determined investigation, his every movement was being pieced together. Phone calls were traced, purchases examined, and witnesses re-interviewed. It became clear Caldwell was meticulous, careful, and calculated, a person who understood the consequences of exposure. The community remained unaware of the mounting pressure. Rumors persisted, some claiming Evelyn had run away, others insisting she had been taken by an outsider. But the truth was far more chilling. Briggs and Langley recognized the urgency. The longer Caldwell remained unmonitored, the greater the risk he might destroy evidence or influence potential witnesses. Then came a subtle yet critical discovery: a hidden alcove behind an abandoned shed on Caldwell's property. During a discreet search, Briggs found fragments of clothing, soil-disturbed ground, and what appeared to be remnant of items belonging to Evelyn. The evidence was circumstantial, but pointed unmistakably toward Caldwell. For the first time, investigators had something concrete to pursue, a tangible link that could withstand scrutiny in court. With the new evidence in hand, Briggs and Langley prepared for the next phase of the investigation. But the process was not straightforward. Caldwell's social standing and connections in the community complicated matters. Any move perceived as aggressive risked alienating potential witnesses or alerting Caldwell himself. Investigators had to act with precision, balancing patience and assertiveness. Community tension escalated as rumors of renewed investigation spread. Some residents feared Caldwell was being unfairly targeted. Others quietly cheered, hopeful that justice for Evelyn might finally come. The town's fragile trust in one another began to fracture further, revealing long-buried resentments and rivalries. Langley coordinated with state forensic experts to examine the items recovered from Caldwell's property. Soil samples, fibers, and fragments of clothing were analyzed meticulously. Each test took weeks, but the results were undeniable. Traces of Evelyn's belongings were present, consistent with the environment where she had disappeared. The combination of the notebook, the handwritten notes, and the recovered items created a compelling case that Caldwell had been in contact with Evelyn and possibly responsible for her disappearance. Meanwhile, Briggs conducted discreet surveillance. Caldwell, unaware of the renewed scrutiny, continued his routine, visiting local stores, attending church occasionally, and maintaining a semblance of normal life. But investigators noticed subtle behavioral changes. He began checking his rearview mirror more frequently, taking longer routes, and appearing increasingly restless. The psychological pressure was mounting, though Caldwell had not yet been confronted. Langley also discovered testimony from a now-grown teen who had spent time in the woods during the summer of Evelyn's disappearance. The witness recalled seeing Caldwell in a state of agitation near a dense thicket, arguing quietly with someone. The details were fragmented, but they aligned with other evidence. Every lead, every recollection, strengthened the case while simultaneously increasing the tension within Cedarville. The Harper family, unaware of these breakthroughs, continued their life in quiet anguish. Mary Harper rarely left the house, obsessively maintaining Evelyn's bedroom as if she might return. Thomas Harper had begun compiling his journals into a detailed timeline, unknowingly providing a roadmap of community interactions, observations, and rumors that would later aid investigators. As the investigation deepened, Caldwell's community began to sense a storm approaching. Hushed conversations, furtive glances, and subtle warnings spread quietly, but Briggs and Langley remained steps ahead. The tension was palpable. Everyone in Cedarville seemed to wonder, was a quiet man among them capable of unspeakable acts? And if so, how many knew and stayed silent? The evidence had shifted the case from speculation to suspicion, but investigators knew it was not yet sufficient for an arrest. They needed a final piece, something that could definitively place Caldwell at the scene and link him directly to Evelyn's disappearance. This would require creativity, persistence, and courage. The stage was set for a critical phase, uncovering the truth hidden for over a year, confronting the perpetrator, and delivering the justice that Cedarville had waited decades to see. The rising tension in the town mirrored the intensity of the investigation, each revelation threatening to shake the community's foundations and expose secrets long kept in the shadows. As Briggs and Langley prepared for the decisive steps, the message to the audience was clear. Justice is often painstaking, requiring patience, evidence, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. And for Cedarville, the moment of reckoning was approaching. It was a crisp morning in late spring when Sheriff Briggs and Detective Langley finally moved. The months of painstaking investigation had yielded enough evidence to justify an arrest. Henry Caldwell, a man who had blended seamlessly into Cedarville's fabric for decades, was about to be confronted with the truth. The team approached Caldwell's modest home quietly, aware that any sudden move might provoke panic or flight. Langley had obtained the final forensic reports. The fibers, soil, and remnant of Evelyn's clothing recovered from the hidden alcove, all conclusively tying Caldwell to the location where Evelyn had disappeared. There was no longer room for doubt. Briggs knocked firmly on the front door. Caldwell answered promptly, wearing a clean shirt and a polite, neutral expression, his eyes betraying nothing. "Henry Caldwell?" Briggs began. "We need to speak with you regarding the disappearance of Evelyn Harper." Caldwell's composure faltered for the briefest moment. His eyes flicked toward the sheriff, then back to Langley. I don't know what you mean," he said softly, almost rehearsed. Briggs remained steady. "We have evidence linking you to the area where Evelyn Harper disappeared. You are under arrest for questioning in connection with her case." Caldwell's polite exterior cracked. He stumbled back, the door partially closing behind him, and a faint tremor ran through his body. Neighbors, drawn by the presence of multiple police vehicles, began gathering discreetly across the street. Whispers rippled through the crowd, fueled by a mix of curiosity, fear, and anticipation. As Caldwell was led into the squad car, he offered no resistance, though his hand shook slightly. The silence of Cedarville was profound. For months, years even, the town had speculated, whispered, and feared. But now, the man many had overlooked or dismissed was in custody. Inside the car, Briggs maintained a professional distance, yet he felt a surge of relief. After years of dead ends, misdirection, and frustration, the investigation had finally reached a tangible, undeniable turning point. Langley noted the reactions of the few neighbors who had gathered. Some faces were incredulous, others relieved, some skeptical. It was a moment that would forever be etched into Cedarville's collective memory. The arrest of a man who had seemed ordinary yet harbored a terrible secret. Briggs and Langley transported Caldwell to the county jail, ensuring every step followed legal procedure meticulously. The last thing they wanted was for procedural errors to jeopardize a case after decades of effort. Every handcuff click, every step down the narrow corridors, reinforced the gravity of the moment. Caldwell was now officially a suspect in a cold case that had haunted Cedarville for more than a year. News of Caldwell's arrest spread rapidly. Cedarville was alive with speculation and disbelief. The local diner, which had once been filled with casual chatter, now became a hub for tense discussions. Mothers whispered to one another over coffee. Fathers spoke in hushed tones, and teenagers exchanged stories tinged with fear and fascination. "Can you believe it?" "Caldwell," one man muttered. "He seemed so quiet, so normal." "Normal people don't do things like that," replied another, shaking his head. But what else would explain Evelyn? The arrest shook the community to its core. People began questioning their assumptions, wondering who they could truly trust. For years, Cedarville had prided itself on appearances and neighborly camaraderie. Now, those same walls seemed to conceal deceit and danger. At the Harper home, the news was devastating and cathartic at the same time. Mary Harper wept openly, relief mingled with sorrow. Decades of fear and uncertainty had finally found a direction, yet the absence of her daughter remained a wound that no arrest could heal. Thomas Harper, usually composed, held Mary tightly, a mix of pride in the investigators and heartbreak over what had been lost. In the weeks following the arrest, Briggs and Langley worked tirelessly to ensure that Caldwell's rights were protected and that the investigation remained airtight. They re-interviewed witnesses, reviewed all previous evidence, and prepared for the inevitable trial. Every detail was scrutinized, every statement cross-checked. The arrest was just the beginning. The real work lay ahead in building a case that could withstand legal and emotional scrutiny. Meanwhile, the town of Cedarville began to reckon with its past. Families who had once passed by Caldwell's home without thought now stared, wondering how they had missed the signs. School children whispered about the man who had walked among them unnoticed, while adults debated how a quiet, unassuming figure could commit such an act. Even local businesses were affected. Customers hesitated to shop. Conversations became tense, and the weight of the unresolved emotion surrounding Evelyn's disappearance loomed over every interaction. Cedarville's social fabric had been irreversibly altered, a reminder that one individual's actions could ripple through an entire community. The media began to take notice. Reporters from neighboring counties arrived, eager to cover the story of the man arrested for a crime that had haunted the town for decades. Interviews were conducted, photographs taken, and headlines published, cementing Caldwell's arrest in public consciousness. The shock was widespread, transcending Cedarville's borders, and sparking discussions on cold cases, investigative persistence, and the hidden complexities of small-town life. For those following Evelyn's story, it was a reminder. Even when justice is delivered, the echoes of past actions can continue to reverberate, and the truth often runs deeper than it appears. For viewers, the message was clear. Subscribe and stay tuned, because the revelation of an accomplice would bring the next shocking chapter of this decades-long cold case to light. Cedarville woke the morning after Caldwell's conviction with a strange mixture of relief and unease. While decades of fear and uncertainty had been punctuated by the judge's ruling, the note implicating a potential accomplice lingered like a shadow over the town. People went about their routines, yet every glance across the street, every nod at a neighbor, carried a subtle question. Who else knew? Who else was hiding the truth? Sheriff Briggs and Detective Langley wasted no time. They returned to the evidence, re-examining statements, cross-referencing visitor logs, and reviewing minor inconsistencies that had been dismissed earlier. The investigation had now become twofold: ensuring Caldwell's conviction was airtight and quietly identifying the mysterious accomplice. Meanwhile, the Harper family tried to navigate the fragile relief that had settled over them. Mary Harper began sleeping slightly better, her anxious energy softened by the thought that justice had been served, if only partially. Yet she could not shake the sense that the story wasn't complete. "Evelyn's gone," she confided to Thomas. "But someone else out there, someone who helped him, hasn't been found. I can feel it." In the community, whispers grew louder. Friends of Caldwell, neighbors, and even business owners began to recount small oddities from the past. Unusual errands he had run for someone, odd requests involving materials or equipment, unexplained absences that had seemed insignificant at the time. Briggs and Langley combed through these recollections, piecing together a puzzle that had lain dormant for decades. Then came an unexpected revelation. A former classmate of Caldwell's wife came forward, speaking quietly to Langley after reading a local newspaper article. She revealed that years earlier, Caldwell's wife had expressed concern about her husband's behavior, odd disappearances, secrecy around certain tasks, and instructions to hide materials in the woods. While she insisted she had never known the full extent of his actions, her observations suggested complicity, or at least awareness on the part of someone in close proximity to Caldwell. This revelation added layers of complexity. Could Caldwell's wife have been the accomplice? Or had she unwittingly facilitated the crime through silence and fear? Briggs knew that to pursue justice fully, they had to tread carefully, avoiding speculation while gathering evidence. Cedarville's residents grew increasingly uneasy as rumors swirled. The town diner, once the center of casual chatter, became a quiet observatory of subtle gestures, with people watching for signs of hidden guilt in the faces of neighbors. Parents became hypervigilant. Neighbors eyed one another warily, and even teenagers began reporting strange interactions they had noticed in the past. The fabric of trust within the town was fraying, revealing a tension that had been building quietly for decades. For Briggs and Langley, the investigation took on a new intensity. They organized surveillance, discreet interviews, and re-examinations of physical evidence. Small details that had been overlooked, like a hidden trail, a set of footprints, or items left in storage, were now revisited with painstaking care. Each piece brought them closer to uncovering whether Caldwell had truly acted alone, or whether someone else had shared in the deception. The Harper family, while emotionally exhausted, supported the investigators' relentless pursuit. Mary Harper began compiling her own observations from the past year, providing details she had dismissed or forgotten during the initial shock. Thomas Harper's journals, now expanded to include months of post-arrest reflections, offered chronology that investigators could cross-reference with witness statements and physical evidence. As weeks passed, the tension in Cedarville intensified. The town streets, once quiet, now carried an air of suspicion. Every knock on the door, every unexpected visitor, triggered whispers and speculation. Families began to reevaluate the people they trusted, and the sense of normalcy that had existed before Evelyn's disappearance seemed forever altered. The twist in the case, the possibility of an accomplice, serve as a reminder to the community and to viewers following the story. Crimes hidden in plain sight often involve layers of secrecy, and the truth may involve more than a single perpetrator. Briggs and Langley's investigation, while methodical and discreet, suggested that Cedarville's dark secrets were not yet fully revealed. For the audience, the lesson was clear. Even when justice is delivered, unresolved questions can linger, and the pursuit of truth may uncover uncomfortable realities about trust, complicity, and the lengths people will go to protect or conceal their secrets. The stage was set for the next chapter. The identification of the potential accomplice, revelations that would shock Cedarville once again, and the unraveling of decades of hidden actions. Justice had been served for Caldwell, but the deeper story, the truth behind every silence, every hidden act, was only beginning to emerge. The investigation into the potential accomplice moved quietly but swiftly. Sheriff Briggs and Detective Langley knew that while Caldwell's conviction provided partial closure, uncovering the full truth was essential for the Harper family, for Cedarville, and for justice itself. Every lead, every whisper, and every overlooked detail from the past year was revisited. The breakthrough came unexpectedly from a local hardware store owner, Mr. Leonard Hayes. He recalled seeing Caldwell accompanied by another man on the day Evelyn disappeared. At first, Hayes hadn't thought much of it. Caldwell was a known handyman, and the other man, quiet and unassuming, had seemed like a helper or a friend. But Langley's questioning revealed subtle but critical details. The accomplice had carried tools that later matched impressions found in the woods, and his gait, height, and movements corresponded to traces discovered near the overgrown path where Evelyn had last been seen. Briggs and Langley began surveillance discreetly, tracing the life of this man, Charles Everett, a middle-aged neighbor who had lived next door to Caldwell for years. On the surface, Everett was a model citizen, quiet, polite, and well-regarded in social circles. He had volunteered at the church, helped with local construction projects, and maintained a spotless reputation. Yet, the evidence pointed to a man who had hidden in plain sight, quietly assisting Caldwell in concealing Evelyn's disappearance. Investigators approached Everett cautiously. They began with subtle inquiries, checking financial records, local activity logs, and any connections to Caldwell that could indicate coordination. Even minor purchases, tools, fuel, and materials, were scrutinized for links to the crime scene. Over time, the evidence grew undeniable. Everett had been at the woods on multiple occasions near the time of Evelyn's disappearance, and forensic evidence tied to his possessions matched what was found around the overgrown trail. When Everett was finally brought in for questioning, his demeanor was calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. Briggs and Langley presented the evidence methodically. Eyewitness accounts, forensic traces, and a timeline showing his presence alongside Caldwell during critical periods. Everett initially denied involvement, insisting he had no knowledge of Evelyn's fate and had merely assisted Caldwell on mundane tasks. But Langley's persistence, combined with the mounting evidence, began to unravel his story. The small inconsistencies he offered, the nervous fidgeting, and the subtle admissions he could not retract all pointed to complicity. Over hours of questioning, Everett's facade slowly cracked, revealing the uncomfortable truth. He had aided Caldwell, knowingly assisting in concealment of Evelyn's disappearance. The revelation sent shockwaves through Cedarville. The community had assumed Caldwell acted alone, a quiet hidden evil, but Everett's involvement suggested a deeper web of secrecy. Families, friends, and neighbors began questioning what they thought they knew about one another. People who had trusted Everett were suddenly confronted with the uncomfortable reality that appearances could be deceiving and that evil could be quietly collaborative. For the Harper family, the news was bittersweet. Relief at finally learning the full truth was tempered by the realization that their daughter's disappearance had involved multiple people. Mary Harper wept quietly in the corner of the sheriff's office when Langley delivered a confirmation, holding Evelyn's locket like a lifeline to the daughter she had lost. Thomas Harper clenched his fists, rage mingled with grief, as he processed a betrayal of trust by someone the town had considered harmless. Briggs and Langley understood the gravity of this revelation. Everett's arrest would not only complete the legal case, but would also force Cedarville to confront its hidden fractures. People who remained silent out of loyalty, fear, or disbelief were now faced with the undeniable truth. Evil had not acted in isolation, and complicity had enabled a crime that haunted the town for decades. The stage was set for the next section: the arrest of Everett, his interrogation, and the community's reckoning with a second layer of betrayal, a revelation that would cement this case as one of Alabama's most shocking cold cases. The arrest of Charles Everett was executed quietly early one morning to avoid public hysteria. Sheriff Briggs and Detective Langley approached his home with a mix of caution and resolve, knowing that Everett had been a trusted figure in Cedarville for decades. Neighbors looked on with puzzled expressions as police quietly took him into custody, his calm exterior giving little indication of the storm that had just begun. Everett's interrogation was meticulous. He initially maintained his innocence, claiming that he had only accompanied Caldwell on routine tasks, oblivious to any wrongdoing. But the forensic evidence, eyewitness accounts, and inconsistencies in his story gradually cornered him. Hours of questioning revealed chilling details. Everett had knowingly helped conceal evidence, transported materials used to hide traces of Evelyn, and even assisted in altering areas near the woods to confuse investigators. The revelation rocked Cedarville. Families who had trusted him for years were forced to reconsider every interaction, every favor, every casual conversation. The quiet man next door, the one who volunteered at the church, helped fix fences, and smiled politely at neighbors, was now exposed as complicit in a decades-old crime. The betrayal struck deeply, especially in a town that prided itself on community bonds. The Harper family, while grappling with renewed grief, felt a measure of vindication. Mary Harper wept openly when informed of Everett's arrest, recognizing that the uncovering of the second accomplice was necessary for true justice. Thomas Harper, though enraged, understood that this revelation validated years of hope and persistence. "We finally know the full story," he said quietly to Briggs, "and now it can't be buried again." Media attention intensified. Newspapers and radio stations from across Alabama covered the unfolding saga, highlighting Cedarville's shock and the chilling realization that Caldwell had not acted alone. The story became a cautionary tale about trust, appearances, and the hidden darkness that can exist even in the most seemingly ordinary communities. Within Cedarville, the impact was immediate. Conversations at the diner, the local grocery, and the church shifted from casual pleasantries to hushed discussions of secrets and complicity. Parents reevaluated friendships. Neighbors eyed one another warily, and community leaders faced questions about the unnoticed signs of danger in their midst. The town, once tightly knit, now confronted the reality that deception had flourished quietly for decades. For Briggs and Langley, the focus shifted to building a case against Everett that would stand in court. While Caldwell had been tried and convicted, Everett's involvement introduced new legal complexities. Investigators meticulously reviewed his actions, corroborating every claim and cross-referencing timelines to ensure that the prosecution could prove his direct participation in covering up Evelyn's disappearance. The psychological weight on Cedarville was profound. Children who had grown up seeing Everett as a benign figure struggled to understand how someone they trusted could commit or conceal such acts. Adults wrestled with anger, betrayal, and disbelief, realizing that appearances could not be trusted. The town had been forced to confront not just one perpetrator, but an intricate web of deception that had persisted for decades. Despite the shock and betrayal, there was also a sense of collective resolve. Cedarville's residents began to support one another more actively, understanding that vigilance and community awareness were essential to prevent similar horrors from occurring. Local leaders organized meetings, church groups held discussions, and families shared experiences, turning fear into cautious empowerment. The Harper family, though forever altered by Evelyn's absence, began to feel a semblance of closure. While nothing could replace the years lost or the trauma endured, the exposure of both Caldwell and Everett ensured that justice had finally been served, and the full truth of Evelyn's story was known. For the audience, this moment underscored a chilling reality. Cold cases can hide layers of complicity, and true justice requires patience, determination, and courage to confront even the most trusted members of the community. Cedarville's reckoning was not just about punishment. It was about unmasking deception, reclaiming truth, and healing a town scarred by decades of fear. The stage was set for final chapter: reflection, healing, and the lasting legacy of a case that had transformed lives and revealed the profound importance of persistence, vigilance, and unwavering pursuit of justice. With both Henry Caldwell and Charles Everett behind bars, Cedarville began the long, painful process of reckoning. The town had endured decades of fear, speculation, and quiet suspicion, and now the truth had emerged in full, a truth that was both devastating and, in a sense, liberating. Families who had quietly feared the worst finally understood what had transpired. And though grief lingered, there was a measure of closure that had long been denied. The Harper family's life remained deeply marked by Evelyn's absence, but her parents and siblings began to find ways to remember her without being consumed by sorrow. Mary Harper organized a small memorial in her daughter's honor, inviting neighbors and friends to share stories, photos, and reflections. It was a cathartic act, one that allowed the community to acknowledge the trauma while also celebrating Evelyn's life. Thomas Harper, who had spent countless hours compiling detailed journals of the investigation, turned his records into a personal archive, a comprehensive chronicle of the case that might one day serve as a guide for law enforcement or historians studying cold cases in small-town America. For Sheriff Briggs and Detective Langley, the case was both a triumph and a reminder of the challenges inherent in seeking justice. They had pursued the truth over months and decades, piecing together subtle clues, witness statements, and forensic evidence. Briggs reflected on the years of dedication, realizing that patience and diligence were sometimes the only way to unearth the truth. Langley, sitting in his office late one evening, reviewed the investigative files and felt a mix of relief and solemnity. Justice had been served, yet the cost, emotional, psychological, and communal, was enormous. Cedarville, meanwhile, slowly began to heal. Conversations in the town shifted from speculation and fear to reflection and learning. Parents spoke with their children about vigilance, trust, and the importance of reporting concerns. Community meetings focused on safety, support, and awareness. Church leaders emphasized compassion, vigilance, and resilience, encouraging the town to emerge from the ordeal stronger, more cautious, yet not consumed by suspicion. The arrest and conviction of the accomplice, Everett, reinforced a message that no secret remained hidden indefinitely. The town realized that even in a close-knit community, appearances could be deceiving and vigilance was essential. The revelation of complicity among trusted members of the community had been shocking, but it also highlighted the importance of accountability and integrity. Residents began quietly reassessing relationships, reevaluating trust, and acknowledging the subtle warning signs they had once overlooked. Conversations at the diner, in grocery stores, and during church gatherings carried a new gravity. Cedarville was no longer the town it had been prior to Evelyn's disappearance. It had been forever transformed by the exposure of hidden truths and the pursuit of justice. The Harper family, supported by friends and neighbors, found solace in knowing that both men responsible, directly and indirectly, for Evelyn's disappearance were finally facing the consequences of their actions. While they could not reclaim the years lost, they took comfort in knowing that no one else would suffer the same injustice at the hands of Caldwell or Everett. Even as Cedarville grappled with its trauma, there were signs of resilience. Neighborhoods, once marked by quiet unease, slowly returned to a sense of cautious normalcy. Community programs were initiated to strengthen bonds, encourage transparency, and ensure that vigilance was balanced with compassion. Cedarville was learning, painfully but surely, how to move forward. As months passed, Cedarville slowly reclaimed a sense of rhythm and stability. The case that had haunted the town for decades became part of its collective memory, shaping how residents approached trust, community, and the lessons of vigilance. The arrests and convictions of Henry Caldwell and Charles Everett left an indelible mark, not only on Harper family, but on every individual who had once assumed that small-town life was free from hidden dangers. The Harper family took deliberate steps to honor Evelyn's memory. Mary Harper established a scholarship fund in her daughter's name, providing support to local students pursuing education in criminal justice and forensic science. It was a way to turn tragedy into purpose, to ensure that Evelyn's story would inspire vigilance and dedication in future generations. Thomas Harper volunteered with local law enforcement, sharing insights from his meticulous journals and helping train young investigators in the nuances of cold case methodology. Their grief remained, but it was transformed into action, advocacy, and remembrance. Cedarville's social fabric, though initially shaken, began to mend. The town's leaders instituted programs designed to encourage open communication, strengthen neighborhood networks, and foster accountability. Community awareness initiatives focus on recognizing subtle warning signs, understanding the importance of speaking up, and building resilience in the face of trauma. Cedarville, once defined by fear and secrecy, now carried a cautious sense of empowerment born from confronting its darkest chapter. For Briggs and Langley, the case became a career-defining achievement. Both were invited to speak at conferences, sharing insights into the persistence required to solve decades-old crimes. The methods used, the patient gathering of witness statements, the painstaking forensic cross-referencing, and the careful reconstruction of timelines became a model for cold case investigations across Alabama. Their dedication underscored a critical truth. Justice may be delayed, but unwavering pursuit and meticulous work can ultimately prevail. Yet the case also left lingering lessons for Cedarville. Residents understood that evil could hide behind ordinary facades, that trust must be balanced with vigilance, and that silence could allow wrongdoing to persist. Conversations continued, long after the courtroom doors had closed, about how the town could prevent similar tragedies, how families could safeguard one another, and how small communities could maintain transparency without succumbing to paranoia. For the broader audience following Evelyn's story, the legacy was clear. Cold cases are rarely simple. They are complex narratives of human behavior, deception, and persistence. They reveal both the darkest elements of human nature and the extraordinary resilience of those who seek justice. Evelyn Harper's disappearance, long a source of heartbreak and fear, ultimately became a story of determination, community reckoning, and the triumph of truth over secrecy. Cedarville's residents, while forever marked by the events of 1967, found a new sense of purpose. The town, scarred but wiser, recognized the importance of vigilance, the value of community solidarity, and the profound impact that relentless pursuit of justice can have on individuals and society. The story of Henry Caldwell and Charles Everett would be recounted for generations, not only as a cautionary tale, but also as a testament to the power of perseverance, dedication, and hope. And for the Harper family, the story culminated in quiet reflection and enduring remembrance. They continue to honor Evelyn's life, educate others, and support initiatives designed to ensure that no victim's story will remain hidden or forgotten. In the end, Cedarville learned that justice, truth, and healing, though delayed, can transform pain into purpose, fear into awareness, and tragedy into a legacy that inspires courage for years to come. For those following the story, remember, persistence matters, silence can conceal danger, and the pursuit of truth, no matter how long it takes, can restore justice and transform lives. Subscribe, share, and support efforts to ensure that every cold case, every hidden story, has a chance to reach its rightful conclusion. Evelyn Harper's story, and the courage of those who sought justice, will continue to inspire vigilance, compassion, and the relentless pursuit of truth. As months passed, Cedarville slowly reclaimed a sense of rhythm and stability. The case that had haunted the town for decades became part of its collective memory, shaping how residents approach trust, community, and the lessons of vigilance. The arrests and convictions of Henry Caldwell and Charles Everett left an indelible mark, not only on Harper family, but on every individual who had once assumed that small-town life was free from hidden dangers. The Harper family took deliberate steps to honor Evelyn's memory. Mary Harper established a scholarship fund in her daughter's name, providing support to local students pursuing education in criminal justice and forensic science. It was a way to turn tragedy into purpose, to ensure that Evelyn's story would inspire vigilance and dedication in future generations. Thomas Harper volunteered with local law enforcement, sharing insights from his meticulous journals and helping train young investigators in the nuances of cold case methodology. Their grief remained, but was transformed into action, advocacy, and remembrance. Cedarville's social fabric, though initially shaken, began to mend. The town's leaders instituted programs designed to encourage open communication, strengthen neighborhood networks, and foster accountability. Community awareness initiatives focus on recognizing subtle warning signs, understanding the importance of speaking up, and building resilience in the face of trauma. Cedarville, once defined by fear and secrecy, now carried a cautious sense of empowerment born from confronting its darkest chapter. For Briggs and Langley, the case became a career-defining achievement. Both were invited to speak at conferences, sharing insights into the persistence required to solve decades-old crimes. The methods used, The patient gathering of witness statements, the painstaking forensic cross-referencing, and the careful reconstruction of timelines became a model for cold case investigations across Alabama. Their dedication underscored a critical truth. Justice may be delayed, but unwavering pursuit and meticulous work can ultimately prevail. Yet the case also left lingering lessons for Cedarville. Residents understood that evil could hide behind ordinary facades, that trust must be balanced with vigilance, and that silence could allow wrongdoing to persist. Conversations continued, long after the courtroom doors had closed, about how the town could prevent similar tragedies, how families could safeguard one another, and how small communities could maintain transparency without succumbing to paranoia. For the broader audience following Evelyn's story, the legacy was clear. Cold cases are rarely simple. They are complex narratives of human behavior, deception, and persistence. They reveal both the darkest elements of human nature and the extraordinary resilience of those who seek justice. Evelyn Harper's disappearance, long a source of heartbreak and fear, ultimately became a story of determination, community reckoning, and the triumph of truth over secrecy. Cedarville's residents, while forever marked by the events of 1967, found a new sense of purpose. The town, scarred but wiser, recognized the importance of vigilance, the value of community solidarity, and the profound impact that relentless pursuit of justice can have on individuals and society. The story of Henry Caldwell and Charles Everett will be recounted for generations, not only as a cautionary tale, but also as a testament to the power of perseverance, dedication, and hope. And for the Harper family, the story culminated in quiet reflection and enduring remembrance. They continue to honor Evelyn's life, educate others, and support initiatives designed to ensure that no victim's story would remain hidden or forgotten. In the end, Cedarville learned that justice, truth, and healing, though delayed, can transform pain into purpose, fear into awareness, and tragedy into a legacy that inspires courage for years to come. For those following this story, remember, persistence matters, silence and concealed danger, and the pursuit of truth, no matter how long it takes, can restore justice and transform lives. Subscribe, share, and support efforts to ensure that every cold case, every hidden story, has a chance to reach its rightful conclusion. Evelyn Harper's story and the courage of those who sought justice will continue to inspire vigilance, compassion, and the relentless pursuit of truth.